In this movie, I'll show you how to assign and modify one of the custom gradient dot patterns that ships along with Illustrator. Notice that my text is still selected, and I'm looking at the contents of the appearance panel. I'll go ahead and click on my fill to select it, and then I'll click on its dot pattern swatch in order to bring up the pop-up panel. And then, if you're working along with me, you want to once again click on the library icon, choose Patterns, choose Basic Graphics, and then finally choose Basic Graphics Dots. And that'll bring up the pop-up panel that we saw in the previous movie. Notice these last 5 swatches here. Each one of them represents a custom gradient dot pattern. So I'll start by selecting the first one, which is 0 to 50% dot gradation, which is to say that it starts at 0% darkness and extends to 50% darkness as expressed, of course, as a halftone pattern. Now, you may wonder why it stopped short of the top of the letters. After all, that looks like garbage. And what's happening here is that we've assigned that transform effect in a previous movie. So we need to go ahead and turn it off for now by clicking on a little eye icon in front of transform. And now you can see that the dot pattern extends the entire height of the letters automatically. Now, if you want something with more contrast, select the next item over, which is 0 to 100% dot gradation. And that starts at 0% darkness and extends all the way up to 100% at the top. Now, you might disagree with me because, after all, we have some pretty dark dots at the bottom. Well, that's because Illustrator, by default, is extending the dots all the way down to the descenders that are associated with these letters. Now, I'm working with all caps, so I don't have any descenders, but Illustrator goes ahead and invents descenders in its mind. So if you want to tighten things up here, you need to bring back transform by clicking on its eyeball, once again, in order to turn it on. Then click on the word transform in order to bring it up on screen. And we'll still scale the pattern by 75%, let's say. We'll see if that works. But I'm going to decrease the vertical move value, because when you reduce the vertical move value, you move things upward. When you increase the value, you move stuff downward. Anyway, I'll go ahead and turn on the preview checkbox so I can see what I'm doing. Then I'll click inside the vertical value and I'll press Shift down arrow until I move that gradient all the way to the top of the letters. And you can see that we now have a lot less darkness down at the bottom of these characters. What if you want to flip it? That is to say, you don't want the gradient to extend from the top to the bottom. You want it to extend from the bottom to the top. Then you just go ahead and turn on the Reflect Y checkbox right here, in which case you're going to have to increase the vertical value. And I'm just going to take that negative sign in front of 50 points and press the backspace key and then press the tab key in order to assign a vertical move value of positive 50 points. You can also use the rotate value here in order to change the direction of that gradient. So in other words, instead of having it go from bottom to top, we want it to go side to side. So I'll change the angle value to 90 degrees. And we'll see what we end up with. This is something of a mess, of course, as you can see here. So we'd have to increase the horizontal and vertical values in order to spread the gradient across the letters, make some other modifications as well. Anyway, I like things the way they were just a moment ago with an angle value of 0 degrees. So I'll go ahead and click OK. Now the next swatch assigns a darker gradient. It goes from 50% to 100%. So it starts 50% at the top in our case because of the transform effect and extends down to total darkness at the bottom. What if you want an undulating gradient? Why, then you have these undulating options right here. You can either go with undulating coarse dots, which looks like this, or undulating fine dots, which looks like this. I'm going to go with the coarse dots. All right, so I'll click this second to last swatch right there, and then I'll go ahead and hide this floating panel. And of course, that's not really what I want. So I'll go ahead and click on the word transform under fill in order to bring up the transform effect dialog box. And we don't really need to reflect the gradient anymore. So I'll turn on the preview checkbox just so you can see what I'm talking about. And I'll turn off reflect Y. Doesn't really make any difference because we were just reflecting things vertically, and this is a horizontal gradient. If you want it to be a vertical gradient, though, of course, you can change that angle value to 90 degrees and you end up with this effect here. All right, that's not what I'm looking for, though. So I'll change this back to 0 degrees, and I'll increase the horizontal scale value to 200%, and that gives me these elliptical dots as opposed to circular ones because the vertical value is still set to 75%. So why don't we take care of that by changing the vertical value to 200% as well, and we end up with this effect here. So I'll go ahead and click OK in order to accept that change. And that, friends, is how you assign and modify one of the 5 custom gradient dot patterns that ships along with Illustrator.